welcome to the first name basis remote podcast. Today I got a good friend of mine joining me, George. We're going to get a little bit more about him, but what we wanted to do is have a chat with industry leaders on this podcast, really talk about, having an informal conversation. I always say I get to have these amazing conversations over the phone, and we got so much learning that happens, especially when you and I talk, George. And this is going to be an opportunity for us to share that with the world. So I'm Sheetal Jaitley. If you don't know who I am, the CEO of Tribal Scale. We're a software development and design firm here in Toronto, but also facilitate clients globally. And with me, I got George Khalife. Am I saying it right? Am I saying your last
100%.
name?
I mean, you could say Khalife, but it's all good, man.
You're
Close. You're close.
I'm close. Don't worry, Habibi. I'll get it. And George has been a good friend of mine. We'll talk about how we met. I think it's a pretty funny story how we met. But he's a VP at the Toronto Stock Exchange, and he's situated in the Midwest. So he's coming live to air from Chicago right now, and I'm in Toronto. So let's kick it off, George. Let's talk about the first time we met. I think that's a pretty cool story. Why don't we start there?
Yeah, 100%. Well, thanks for having me on, man. I remember seeing the newsletter of First Name Basis, which is your podcast coming back out. So excited to do this. I think, so the first time we met was Toronto. It was Toronto Tech Week, right? And you were speaking on a panel. And I remember I'm seeing this, Toronto tech founder. And then all of a sudden you mentioned you guys have an office in Dubai. And I'm like, oh shit, we definitely need to connect.
Yeah.
So once the panel finishes, I hit you up and I'm like, dude, my background's in the Middle East. I was born in Lebanon, lived there for probably half my life. And it was just an interesting story to see how quickly you scaled. You went from not just an office in Toronto, but it was multiple offices in the US, and the Middle East and that was the first time, to be honest with you, that I heard a Toronto tech founder seriously build up exposure and presence in the Middle East. So for me, that was super cool. We connected, and obviously, and I was telling my girlfriend about this, is if you ask anybody in Toronto who Cheetal Jaitley is, the first response people are going to say is, oh, no way, Cheetal, he's my friend too. Literally every single person I talk to. And it's just funny too that, I thought I was well connected until I met you, brother. So I think
hey, man, your network is, I always say this, your network is your net worth. I mean, there's people who go network and they think coming back with 50 business cards is like the way to do it. And then there's the people who go network and come back with like 5 meaningful new relationships, right? And that's the way to do it.
Yeah, 100%. And you were also talking about kind of the scaling mindset. Given what's going on now, I know people who are tuning in are, I think just tired about hearing all the COVID stuff, all the email newsletters. I think we all get it. But just from your perspective, and maybe we can talk about what we're both doing in terms of one, transitioning, being as the CEO of a tech company, just kind of personally, but also as a leader of this company, what have you been doing to one, transition, but also keep everybody who's working at Tribal just kind of calm and riding this wave and seeing kind of the opportunities within it?
Yeah, dude, it's tough, man. I mean, us at Tribal, we never even had like a true work from home policy, only until last year. We like being a tribe that sits together and really works side by side with each other. We practice pair programming, so you got multiple screens and two, one computer, shared screens, and people sitting literally right beside each other. And we create these very collaborative pods in a very collaborative environment where you learn a lot, even just through osmosis from people having conversations around you. But last year we started experimenting with, doing some more remote work and seeing how we could do that. And so it was odd. I was in New York City on March 11th, and that was the day the world changed, right? Like COVID became, the night before in New York, we went for dinner, we went out to a bar, we were like doing all the stuff that you normally would do in New York City. And so on the day of the 11th, I had a couple meetings, and then the whole world changed within like an hour. It was bam. The NBA is canceled. Sophie Trudeau has COVID. Tom Hanks has COVID. Everybody has COVID. And I was like so taken back by it that right away I went into mode of doing planning and saying, well, what can I do with the tribe? We got to take care of our people first. And so we created protocols and stuff that a lot of people are doing now, but we created a very basic but smart guideline as to how we can go work from home. And then the one thing I asked the tribe to do is like really start to over communicate with everybody. And so we started using, Slack. We got this other program called Discord, which is pretty cool. It's an audio app, and it's like Slack kind of rooms, chat rooms, and it's just audio based, and you jump in and you start talking to everyone. And we still did our daily stand-ups that we do, and we do a company-wide stand-up every morning, which is really cool. We get everybody online now, and, engagement levels I found are even actually more people are more engaged being remote, as funny as that sounds. And I've been really, one of our core values here at Tribal Skill is transparency. And so I've been not only leveraging the daily stand up to talk about what's actually happening and like what are some of the big challenges that we're going to be facing today. Budgeting, for example, like let's talk about finances. Business is down, companies don't want to pay you. I sympathize with all of our clients and our partners and the struggle that they're in right now, and payment terms and what could we do to help them. Like this is the time I think for that you're a true partner. Like Tribal Skill really stands out. So what could we do as our tribe to help service our clients right now when they're in a time of need, and what could we do to help them financially? But let's also have that transparent conversation with our people. We've been fortunate enough that we have not laid anybody off yet. And I say the word yet because I don't know what the future is going to hold. We have our guesses and our predictions and our forecasts, but the transparent way I'm talking to you guys and people live on Instagram and YouTube and wherever this podcast is going to go next is very, I'd be even more transparent with our people. So they understand we're all in this together. And so we are going to have to make some tough choices, right? We have options in front of us, and we just had and the other thing I do is I do an Ask Me Anything every Friday. We do demos at 4:00 on Fridays of everything we built that week. It's pretty cool to sit in on those demos and see what everybody's been working on. But then it's also really, I've used that opportunity to have everybody together on Fridays to say, hey, let's have a beer or wine or whatever your drink of poison, whatever your choice of poison is. And let's be frank with each other and ask me questions. And so I get anonymous questions sent to me, and a lot of people are feeling more and more comfortable to just ask me face to face any questions they have. And so I'd be very transparent with them and tell them. And just yesterday, we had to have a real conversation with the tribe about like, hey, in this particular downturn that we're in, and they have all the information to know that we're not hitting the metrics of where the company needs to be. So what are some of the levers we need to pull? And we are going to have to do some salary adjustments, and that's a tough pill to swallow. It sucks as a CEO to go to the people are working hard and through no fault of their own. You're going to have to make salary adjustments. That sucks. And that's, something we had to have a conversation about just yesterday. And I felt like crap having that conversation. You never feel good coming out of a conversation like that, but having a conversation.
Especially with your kind of personality. I think that's, and knowing you for quite some time and seeing also seeing the culture that you've built, for Tribal Scale. And I remember, man, I'd go to your offices and you guys would do those stand-ups and the demos, and it was such a collaborative, just ecosystem I felt, and people would stick around Friday nights. I never saw that before, where people willingly, and it's not just because of the booze and stuff, but you guys were friends.
We had to actually walk around and kick people out of the office on a Friday night. It's Friday night, go home, get out of this office.
so I can only imagine it's difficult, man. But to your point, like it's difficult to have those conversations, but when you're genuine and you're just looking out for your tribe and you're not trying to lay off anybody, but you're just trying to ride the storm, I think it's the best thing you can do, right?
And the good thing is that because I gave them so much information, they were so comforting and understanding. And I got a ton of messages afterwards on Slack, just from people asking how I'm feeling, and I'm okay. And I'm the opposite. I wanted to know, are you okay? Like, I just gave you really bad news. Like, I'll be fine. I don't think about me, right? But they were just like, hey, we're in this with you. Like, we're totally together. And especially at Tribal Skill, I think we got this culture now. That has actually bonded us really close together, where we actually go and look out for each other. And it's amazing to see. I'm so proud to be in an organization with really smart people who are actually looking out for each other, especially right now. So that's a little bit about us and what we're doing. And I don't want to make this too much about COVID, because I think, like we said in the beginning,
Exactly.
that's been beaten over the head. But what are you seeing, man? Tell us a little bit. I think we should start first. Tell us a little bit about your role and how. I think your story is really cool of how you've been working there, and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started this job and then ended up in Chicago and what you're actually doing.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So for everyone listening who doesn't know me, I was born in Lebanon. As I said, lived half my life in the Middle East, and then when we moved to Canada, my background to be in finance, and simply because I grew up in a family of bankers, right, from my dad to our cousins, and I always kind of grew up in that space. And so in university, I always thought the route was going to be investment banking, consultant, or something like that, as everyone probably would be, right, in first or second year. But I always had the DNA of a sales and marketer, right? So my DNA was always in sales and marketing, and I loved entrepreneurship, but I wasn't necessarily exposed to it. I don't think in university they expose you as much to sales as a legitimate career, even within finance. I didn't even know that was possible, dude. I thought I'd be a sleazy insurance salesman or something like. I just had this weird connotation as I think people normally would. And it wasn't until I joined the TSX, which was my first career outside of uni, and I saw all these companies go public. In 2015, we saw Shopify go public, which was one of the biggest and most successful tech stories, right,
Dude,
in Canada, that came from Ottawa.
You scare me how young you are, man. I mean, you bring so
Yeah,
much
well,
experience for such a young age. You scare me.
it's the
Anyways,
beard.
continue.
It's the beard, cheat. It's just the Arab in me. But it was good, man. And I feel like part of that is growing up in the Middle East and seeing different situations, and having at least the opportunity to come to Canada and be able to have a chance at a better future, a better education. I know that sounds cheesy, but a lot of my cousins don't have the same opportunity. So that's why I took my career a bit more seriously, I think. And so I started with the TSX, and I got to see the IPO side, which is when companies go public. Super cool, right? You saw a lot of very interesting companies go public for quite some time. And then I pivoted, went into mergers and acquisition with a boutique firm.
Yeah.
So they just focused on helping tech companies exit, essentially, which was
Cool.
a really cool experience. Saw the other side of it. I joined a financial tech company called Owl. Co-founders are really good friends of mine. So that gave me kind of the company side experience. And then what ended up happening was TSX rang me up and said, listen, we're trying to grow our presence in the Midwest, in the US. We want to open an office in Chicago, and we think you'd be the perfect person for it. And that's kind of how this whole thing came up. And for those wondering, basically what I'm trying to do is help US companies go public in Canada on both the Toronto Stock Exchange and the TSX Venture Exchange. And it's just a platform where companies raise money and pursue those growth plans. So
very cool, very cool. Americans, I always say, and you and I have this conversation all the time, but Americans, we always say, are very different from Canadians when it comes to business. I think are much more risk adverse and slow, and Americans really go and give you a shot and grab the bull by the horns and start making decisions and move really fast.
Right.
What's your experience been like in Chicago as you went and started to expand the TSX with you?
Yeah, dude, that's a great question. I think I've seen it from different ends, right? So from one end, you might typically hear that the US is more ecocentric, right? And I've kind of felt that a little bit. So for example, I'd come in and be like, oh, I work for the TSX, and I just assume people would know what the brand is because, we're one of the largest exchanges in the world.
Yeah.
We have a pretty big brand, and yet people are like, what, you guys have an exchange up there?
Yeah.
I'm like,
Toronto,
up there,
Toronto
dude,
has an exchange.
It's not like I live in the Arctic, man. Relax. It's an hour away by flight. So I found that to be a bit interesting and kind of challenging from one end. And to your point, I think it depends where you are, right?
In the Midwest too? Did they think you lived in an igloo?
A little bit. A little bit. There's some weird connotations with Canadians, dude. But the funny part is, like, the Midwest is actually more, I would say, similar to the Canadian culture, right? Not as aggressive as what you'd see in like the coast, New York, Cali, Boston. And then from a cap raising, I was telling you this yesterday when we had a quick call and catching up. For me right now, Chicago in the Midwest, and by Midwest, I mean like Ohio, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, dude, they're exactly where Toronto, Ottawa, that whole innovation corridor, Waterloo, where that was 3 years ago. It's just on a surge right now. And it's mostly because labor is getting super expensive in the coast. They're realizing that they can do just a better job in the Midwest. And fun fact for you, dude, so if you look at just Chicago, all the startups here that are VC backed, so they have venture capital money. outputted the highest return for investors among every state in the U.S.,
Wow.
which is insane. They had the highest returns. It's just in Chicago alone. So that goes to show
Wow.
just
You
how
figure
powerful
like
the
there's
Midwest
been
is.
hotbeds, right? You figure like Austin, New York. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously the valley is the valley, but you got Austin, New York. I mean, the DC
Yeah,
tri-state area is like
Seattle.
really kicking it. Seattle, um, really interesting. I didn't know that about Chicago.
I think it's because it's if you look at kind of Chicago, Pittsburgh, these are all blue collar states, right? Rough. They call it like the Rust Belt for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So what you ended up seeing is like traditional industries like freight, logistics, supply chain, manufacturing, transportation. All of that had disruption with tech,
Yeah.
right? But the difference is they were tackling real challenges and they had to be profitable really early because it was more difficult for the most part to raise financing.
It's funny how that happens, eh? When you don't got a
It's
boatload
crazy.
of money behind you, that you become efficient and actually make money.
I call this a Lebanese business, dude. If I went to my cousins and I said I want to raise money, they're like, "What are you talking about?" You know, business is about making money. It's not about raising money. So
Yeah, of course, of course, of course. So, what are some of the themes you're seeing emerging well, not only in Chicago, in the Midwest?
yeah. So as I said, I think Chicago is pretty cool because you see a lot of freight tech. So what that basically means is, transportation companies moving stuff basically back and forth between the U.S., Canada, Mexico, which is interesting. Like there's a company called Freightways, which is super cool. It's kind of like the Bloomberg or the analytics for the freight market.
Okay,
You're seeing in Pittsburgh, very interestingly enough, actually, Carnegie Mellon is one of the top universities for computer sci. So
sure.
very similar to Waterloo, you see a lot of med tech, right? Biotech, a
Mhm.
lot of stuff in the life science space or health tech. So it's kind of different. Michigan right now and Detroit, I would say, are on the cannabis boom
Okay,
primarily, which is until they federally legalize it. But that's what I'm
but
seeing.
I mean, Michigan. I'm sure you're seeing a bunch of automotive startups now.
Of course, yeah, and actually that's something Pittsburgh was strong too is autonomous vehicles
Okay.
with their universities, and I wanted to spin that back to you because why that's interesting on your side is you're caught right now in this perfect mix of this is the best probably time for companies to look at strategy, innovation, especially with
Mhm.
digital.
Yeah.
Yet budgets are kind of constrained because everybody wants to be liquid and clean up their balance sheet. So how do you tackle that problem?
Yeah, I think I'm a broken record, and I keep saying this all the time. If COVID did one thing, it's really make companies wake up and say, hey, what is my digital presence? That could be, how do I optimize my processes to become more digital and more effective now? That could
Mm,
be, how am I going to be relevant to my consumer, or how am I going to be relevant to the other businesses? And the only channel to do that right now is digital. So if you were underinvested in digital, now is the time to go invest. Except, and I totally get this and I sympathize with a lot of our clients and partners, is your CFO goes, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So cut all spending right now. And this is a temporary blip that you're going to have this spending be cut. But having been through a couple of recessions and seeing this in a services business, you you actually could find opportunity in the chaos. And the opportunity in the chaos is that you take a large Fortune 500 company, and they have to go and cut right now because it's unsettling times, and so they go and they cut their staff and they cut down their operating expenses. Except now in a post-COVID world, you're going to have to be more digital, and you're going to have projects that are related to ROI, so your return on investment on your digital spend, or you're going to have a strategy that's going to have to make you more relevant in the digital space. And both of those projects are going to be green lit because that is what a post COVID world looks like. But you don't have the people to do it for you anymore. So what do? You use your capital expenditure on a company like Tribal Skill, and then we come in and actually help them. And the cool thing about our value add is that we could then, through our transformation model, actually help you build a team and help you build a software lab and help you do things the right way and help you work like a lean, mean, agile machine, by helping your people, process, and your tools to make that happen. And so I see a ton of opportunity for what we do in the future. And I want to take this time right now to work with my partners and invest in them. Hey, you know what? Not everything always comes down to dollars and cents. I always look at that as a way to keep score. But how can we go invest in our partners and help them through this tough time right now? And they will always remember us for that, and know that we step up to the plate for them and be their actual true partner, that we're in this together, so that we come out of this on the other end the right way.
Yeah, that's a great example. Especially like I had a chat with a founder recently, and we were just kind of talking about reputation, right?
Yeah.
So just like this presents opportunities, it also really highlights shitty characters, unfortunately,
Yeah, of
who are trying to
course.
skim from every freaking side there is. And the problem is, once this settles down, which it likely will. Now, I don't know how that's going to look like, but let's say when it does, your reputation is still going to be there, very visibly,
Yeah, of
And
course.
so if you're kind of cutting it short now, and you're playing the short game versus the long game, that's going to catch up to you eventually.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you got to look at it like especially in a services model, your people and your clients, our people is our value prop, right? It's what we do, and so whatever we could do to help our partners come out of this time of chaos and this time of uncertainty, and help position them for a better and brighter future. That's what you got to do. I think being very short-sighted with your partners and not making that investment into them and nickel and diming every single thing, that's not a true partnership. That's a client vendor relationship, and I hate having those. You said it at the
Mm.
beginning. I'm a relationship guy. I love to nurture my network and invest in my network because and I'm not looking for much in return. I'm not looking for a return. I know the more you put in, just good things, the universe will bring it back. As hippie as that sounds.
And talking just about the networking aspect, because I think that can be of value for a lot of people, especially now that it's mostly digital, right?
Yeah.
And for someone like you and I mean, we're very people oriented, and being on the BD side, the thing I miss the most is just going for coffee chats. Although now I feel like that's been a bit more effective, the fact that I don't have to spend 30 minutes back and forth going to these meetings.
Yeah.
But how do you basically scale that network, especially when it's global, right? Like I have networks both in Saudi, Bahrain, and Lebanon,
Yeah.
across North America. I mean, you're in the same bucket. How do you keep track of this growing network and still keep those relationships,
You know,
I guess, fruitful is the
You know,
word.
I think there's a couple of ways to do that, right? And I think we do it pretty effectively. I mean, George, you got your podcast, I got my podcast. We're combining podcasts right now,
That's right.
and
That's
so
right.
people know what we're up to. Even if they never had a chance to go for coffee with us or have a Zoom meeting, or last night we were playing poker with Zoom.
Man,
I'm a
poker is
little.
on fire right now. I keep getting invited to these things, and to be honest, I'm gonna be totally honest here. I do not play poker,
So come play with
so
us if you don't know how to play. I'm joking.
so you can take advantages.
Um, but it's if we you got to use your social norms to actually go out there and like have an opinion. Like go have an opinion about something. Go out there and talk about what you believe in. Put yourself out there, and I think you'll find like-minded people. And even better yet, if you don't find like-minded people, if you have a healthy debate, you come out of it learning something. Hopefully, you appreciate what the other side has to say, right? And so we do a lot of these things to go out there and do that. And you know, just getting the amount and the volume of messages of just people not even asking about business or anything like that, or looking for anything in return, just reaching out to say, hey, how you doing? Are you okay, man? Is everything okay? How are things up there in Canada? Are you going stir crazy yet? Family good? All sorts of stuff. I think those are you really start to realize what kind of awesome network you built when you start getting messages like that. And I've been sending them out too, right? Like that's how you and I started chatting again, just to make this happen. You're like, hey, everything good, man? How are things going over there? And then great things come from it. The other thing I do is we got like a tribal skill weekly newsletter that goes out. And it's really short, sweet, just like boom. Here's what we're up to. And I love it because as soon as it goes out after that, I get so many replies of just people saying, hey, how's it going? Or talking about an article or something that we published. And you got to find ways to go do that. It's really tough to do a million one-on-ones, but kind of like being like a 1-minute manager. If you're an effective 1-minute manager, just doing a bunch of little things right with your network actually gets you more out there. How about you, man? What are some of the stuff you're doing besides the podcast and stuff?
Yeah, well, I think just the points that you hit is super super important for a couple of things, especially when you're just genuinely reaching out to people to catch up, right? I think that's super important. It's not like I call you because I always want something. I think that gets kind of dry after a while. But if I
Sure.
just call you up and say, "Cheat, how you doing, man? I know this is a tough time. If you need anything from me, let me know." I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's super important. The other thing that you pointed out, which is even more strategic, is and this is kind of one of the reasons I started this podcast, for example, is I wanted to stay within people's radar,
for
and
sure.
and to do that in a scalable way. I found the podcast was the easiest thing. I had a bit of a challenge though, because I know you were saying like get on a platform and just talk about stuff, which I totally agree with.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes the challenge is when you're a little younger, let's say you're a young professional in whatever
I
sector or
got a side
vertical.
question. I got a side question. Are
Yeah,
you the youngest executive at TSX?
on the VP side, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
All right.
yeah, 26 now. So, and I think
You
and to be honest,
you feel
I'm
like a
just starting out,
grandpa.
dude. What's that? I look
You
like I'm
feel like a
42 though.
grandpa. No, you don't. No, you don't. You look just fine, dude.
Much
Your,
love back, baby.
your girlfriend's a lucky girl, I'm sure.
She's right next to me, just nodding her head. Like, what is it? I thought this
Did
was
this,
a podcast.
did this podcast just go there? That's what happens. Is you got to be real.
100%. But I think that's what helped me too, especially when I was younger. Is instead of like acting like I knew everything, which I wasn't. I'm actually, and I'm constantly learning. I'm trying to improve and all that stuff. But I think the easiest way is one, document, kind of like what Gary Vee says, document your experiences versus always talk about what people should do.
Sure.
And the easiest way for me was I interview very cool CEOs, founders, talk to them about
Dude, your
their
podcast is
journeys.
your podcast is awesome, man. You've had some
Thanks,
amazing
man.
people on there. I'm really proud of what you've been able to do with that in such a short period of time. It's
Trying,
amazing.
man.
It's good
Trying.
job,
It was
man.
hard launching it too, because I mean I did that in the capital markets where in finance, 3.5, 4 years ago, launching a podcast wasn't a cool thing to do.
Right.
People are like, "What do you think you are, Jimmy Fallon?" Or it's like a talk show host. It just kind of had a
Well, you
negative.
got the Howard Stern mic over there. Look at you.
I know it's a
It's
podcast
dope.
studio.
It's
I'm
dope.
ready.
It's dope. I
I got
love
the
it.
light. You got
I
to
love
make
it.
sure you're
I love
prepped.
it.
But it's been really good. It's been really good. And the last thing I just want to say is the easiest way to get in front of a CEO, especially for my line of work, instead of just always from a BD angle or sales angle, man, it's funny how many friends I've made just from interviewing them on my podcast.
For sure.
Because for an hour, I'm talking about your story. I'm getting to know you on a deep lens. And it
Mhm.
just creates that frictionless relationship right off the bat. So it's super easy to create that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yes. So
Absolutely. I think, like with our takeover conference that we've done in Toronto, and
which
we've
was
done two.
awesome, man.
Yeah, we've done two of them, and
Dude, Cheeto coming on stage with Biggie music blasting in the back. Every single person, by the way, in a suit. There's people from all over the place. So just keep this in mind. This setting up for people who weren't in attendance. You have Cheeto, who I think in Toronto is like the badass CEO walking on stage. Biggie blasting in the background. And what was your opener? Your opener was something crazy. Do you remember what it was?
no, dude, you're actually making me relive it. But my opener, what I said, or the music.
What you said. What you said.
Oh no! So in the second year, I was supposed to. The second year we did the conference. I was supposed to come up on stage and like I'm all nervous, Like I don't really get nervous. My hands were all clammy. I was like, oh, I'm gonna go up in front of all these people, and it's being live streamed. And Justin Trudeau just was on, like he opened it up for us, and now I gotta go on
Crazy.
up there, right? I'm like, I'm all nervous, and but my music was actually Jeezy. It was I put on for my city, on for my city. And I go up, and the production guy, I don't know what he put on, but he put on some gangster rap where every other word was like mother this, mother F that, F this, F that. And I went up there and I was just like, that wasn't the music I had queued, but I'll take it. It's pretty bad.
Let's go.
That's why I just opened it up like, all right, we started effing up right away in the morning. First thing in the morning.
Everybody was on, dude. Yeah. The energy was awesome in that conference too.
But you know what? That conference did a lot of cool things for us. I always said, I got an amazing network, and it's a global network, and I wanted to bring that network all into one room so they could start networking with each other. And I didn't want to have a conference where people go up there and it's just lip service and it's a big sales pitch. Like, go up there and talk about how you effed up. Go up there and talk about the real challenges you're facing. How are you solving them? So we had some pretty high-powered panels and sessions, like workshops, so you could actually go there and learn a skill. But just like you said, it was a great way for us to, people go, why are you doing this? Like, Tribal Skills, a design and development firm. Why would you go and do this conference? And it's not even like we got up there and talked about Tribal Scale, right? What we did is we talked about innovation.
Content. Yeah.
But what it actually did was be a very warm way for people who didn't know us or do beyond just BD efforts and say, hey, why don't we all come together and build this platform for all of us to help learn from it and leverage ourselves to have a better future, right? Like our tagline, our mission statement is write the future. And that's the way to write the future. Like, let's go and do this together. And so having said that, I mean, my team and I are actually working on pretty pretty diligently around the clock right now on how we could bring takeover online. That's the first time I'm telling this to everyone in the world. So
I love that.
we're gonna bring an online version of takeover now and do that. Yeah.
What were some of the lessons? Just on because I think for maybe for people who aren't as close to the tribal story, I think there are so many interesting points, which is, man, you guys were able to grow so quickly. And I think what's even more interesting to that is you came from the sales side. And I remember you were, you talked on stage about different roles, some of which worked out really well, some of which not at all, in terms of being chained on a desk and just not vibing well with your mindset. How do you go from that, for people listening who maybe this is a perfect time for them to start the venture they've been putting aside, to starting Tribal Scale? It hit 100 plus employees at one point. You had massive growth, man. Office in Dubai, multiple in the US, working with some of the largest clients. How do you go from, selling door to door to building Tribal Scale, essentially?
And for those who don't know, I actually did. I went door to door selling photocopiers.
I know you cheat.
That's what I did, dude. That's my shit. You know what? It was cool. I just on that copier story. I was told by one of my mentors, and he was like, "Hey, man, you got this knack for sales, and you've been doing this business development stuff, but you never got any formal training. Go into the copier industry, and if you can go and sell a box that prints paper better than someone else who has a box that prints paper, then you actually know that you're refining your craft." And they had amazing sales training, and I got to work in this bullpen of just salespeople, right? Like it's hard, like walking in there being intimidated by all these dudes in suits who are just on the phone, high end, like just hustling, man. And then you got to go out there, and your sales manager kicks you out, and you got to go out there door to door and like do that. But having said that, I'll tell you what it taught me. I never looked at any sales job that I had as I work for this company. I always looked at it as I work for myself. You kill what you eat in the sales game, right? So you have to have this entrepreneur type of mindset. And I take that across. If I look across our organization, the people who really excel and kick ass are the ones who don't look at Tribal Skill as a job, actually look at it as, hey, do you know what? Tribal Skill has a lot of assets here. And as an entrepreneur, I'm going to leverage these assets for my career, right? So if you start getting more of an entrepreneur mindset, then when you go into entrepreneurship, it's a lot easier because you've always been thinking that way. And that's kind of my mindset on how I always viewed myself. It didn't matter where I worked. I always looked at it as like, hey, I got a bunch of tools here to go make. And I know if I do all these things, then Sheetal Inc. will make X amount of dollars this year, right? And so I'm going to go do everything in my power to go make X amount of dollars because I am my own business within this organization. And it's a different mindset when you stop looking at your job as a job, and when you actually go look at it as like, hey, I'm doing this for myself and my career, and I am my own company, is actually going to go do that. And having that, being an entrepreneur, really, it's always, and you see that in every organization. I mean, I think the entrepreneurs within an organization are the ones who fly up really quick. Like nobody told you to go start a podcast. Nobody told you to do all the things you're doing. And who gets the benefit from it? Not only you personally, because you are, George Inc., but TSX gets all this awesome value from you. And there's a reason why you're so young and a VP there.
Right? Yeah, well, it's a great point, man. And I think even on the sales side, like I learned so many things in the past, I think 5 years. One was, in the beginning, I thought to be in the sales game, you just had to have a personality, right? Like you had to have the charisma, you had to be, the optimistic dude who can socialize, network quickly, build relationships. Although that's great, that's only a starting point, right? I actually didn't, it wasn't until later in my career that I found out that there's actually a lot of techniques to sales as well. It really is a science, just like any sport, you kind of have to craft it. And obviously that's a starting point. And I love what you said around, like to me, I think probably one of the best traits is being opportunistic, and being resourceful. So for me, like when I started at TSX, just a quick story is I started with like an associate program, right? So you basically rotate every 6 months for 2 years in different divisions.
Cool.
Dude, my first rotation was in a department that was super manual. It was like, it wasn't a fun department for me personally, right? And I felt like, okay, well, this is what it is for 6 months. And they were still testing the program. And I'm like, I can use these 6 months and be miserable, let's say. Not that it was that bad. Everybody working there was great, but just the work itself wasn't for me, I guess.
Sure.
So I'm like, listen, I can be miserable for 6 months and do work I'm not really interested in, or I can use these 6 months to network with everyone in the company and outside,
Yeah.
and use this to build the framework for the podcast and the app at the time. And
I
that's what I
love it.
used those six
I
months for,
love it.
right? Where people, I think, in a different position would have, and I think this is where perspective comes into play, right? It's very easy to just lose it and be like, you know what, this is
This
what's handed
sucks.
to me.
Yeah, this sucks.
It
What am I
sucks.
doing? This is not what I wanted to do. I never signed up for this. Right.
Exactly. So I think attitude is super important in sales, because it's and I'm sure you've dealt with this, man. The rejections, the no's, the hangups in your face, and you get so
Dude,
close with a
I get
prospect.
told to F off 15 times a day and I'm still smiling. I haven't
Dude,
done my job if I haven't been told to F off at least 15 times a day.
I call that alligator skin, man. In sales, just that tough skin. You can't break through it, and then I think that's super important. And so persistence is also really important, because it's easy, man. And I think one of the hardest things in sales is because when you do get the the FUs, let's say
Yeah,
15
yeah.
times a day, to walk into the 20th meeting that same day at 5 p.m. with the same energy, with the same 100% performance, it's very difficult and it can get exhausting. And I think that's why stamina is important too.
But I
Don't you
think
think?
that goes to a lot about like who you are, right? Like you gotta. I don't think that just goes to salespeople. Like I think you could be an engineer and you come in
Exactly.
bringing your A game all the time, and you're gonna have differences of opinion, and some you're gonna be right, some you're gonna be wrong, but you gotta learn from it and bring the A game every single time, right? It's exhausting though. I mean, I gotta say, like at the end of the day, when you've had like 15 meetings or whatever, and you keep bringing your passion and everything into it, it's tiring at the end of the day. But you know when you should like a lot. I see a lot of salespeople who go into rooms, or business development people, or it could be actually could be product managers, whatever, and they go into a room and they aren't passionate about what the client is actually talking about. It shows right away. You have to actually like you should probably kill that deal right away, because you're not doing that person any justice, and you're not doing yourself any justice on working on something that you don't give a shit about, right?
Right.
I think you should always, like I always say, I'll never sign a deal. I'll never get a deal signed that if I was in the other person's shoes, I wouldn't sign myself. You got to make it the right win-win and say, hey, we're completely aligned here. With we see the same vision so that we can execute onto that vision, right? Otherwise, it doesn't happen.
I'm curious to know from your seat as well, like because you've built such a great culture and really a strong brand around tribal. How do you define how do you define culture at tribal scale? But how do you define leadership from your perspective, being a CEO?
Dude, like, I think I do a lot of great things right, and I do a lot of things wrong, right? I think I'm not.
But you own up to it.
I own up to it. I own up to it all the time when I mess up, and I'm being very critical of myself and hard on myself, but it's the only way to learn. Unfortunately, I'm also the person who doesn't learn from other people's experiences way too well. I mess up on my own and end up learning that way. If I could just fix that part of my life,
You have to go through it.
I don't know why. I was on a call earlier today, and they're like, "You love your back against the wall. That's your adrenaline." You know, they're like, you're like one of those guys, like in the back in the days of hunters and gatherers, you would have been the hunter out there with adrenaline the whole time. Like you got to kill what you eat.
Chasing the mammoth.
Yeah, chasing the mammoth. So maybe it is adrenaline, but I think you gotta just treat people the way you'd want to be treated yourself. I think is the big thing. When things get heated, I did like my first 2.5, 3 years of tribal skill, I'd fucking have blow-ups. I would lose my mind. I would be yelling, screaming, whatever. I've started to do a lot of self-reflection in the last like 1.5, 2 years of saying, hey, you know what? There's more effective ways to communicate. There's better ways of taking a step back, looking at what the problem is and going to solve it. Sure, you're going a million miles an hour and yelling and screaming just seems like the right thing to do to get shit done, but you can often get more done with honey. And, I'm no perfect leader, but I think you got to let teams you got to give teams autonomy to go out and do what they need to do. But and my big fault, I think, has been that I did that. And then I really screwed up the piece about accountability. Going back to that team and holding them accountable to say, did they actually complete what they did? And that is
Do you feel that it's because you were scaling at a pace that becomes
No,
somewhat difficult?
I just think it was my personality that I trust, and I just figure it'll be done and it'll be done right or whatever it may
Gotcha.
be.
So you trust first, and then you like trust first, and then execute, so I can actually prove
Yeah,
that I
but then
trust.
my problem is I didn't check up properly to make sure is it being done, or
Gotcha.
hey, is this in line with a larger initiative? And I think my big takeaway is, hey, when you have an accountability, like when if you have a if we set you off on a task, like let's say you and I are working together, and I put you off on a task, I think you better bring your A game when it's time to like present to me and do it right. And that meeting doesn't necessarily have to be a meeting where you go out feeling great. There might be areas that you know yourself you didn't complete your stuff, and you got to hold yourself accountable and be like, hey, Shield, this stuff's not done, and be ready for an answer of why isn't it done, and it should have been done by that date. Like, what did you screw up on, and how was it done? If you look at some of the most successful people out there, I'm not saying it's right, but like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, I could go on and on. Of these guys are reputations of being assholes. You can say all you want about Steve Jobs, but he changed the fucking world. Right? Like I think there's a way of doing it without being a prick, but I think people should be ready and confident to go into a meeting where you're presenting something to your boss that, hey, you've done everything you can and you brought your A game. And if you yourself don't feel you have, then be ready for a difficult meeting as to why you haven't done it and what are you going to do to change so that you don't have a bad meeting with that person again, right? And we as leaders a lot of the time take the easy way out of just like, okay, everything's fine, let's move on. And your friends are your friends for outside of the office. In the office, get shit done.
Yeah.
Right? I am not perfect at this at all. It's easier for me to talk to you about this on a podcast than actually practice in the real world. But I'm starting to look at how I can do that more effectively now as a leader. How about you, man?
Yeah, well,
how are you
exactly
doing that?
Yeah, no, listen, I mean, I'll talk about it from I guess, a different vantage point. But I think a really good book actually on this is The Leader Who Had No Title, Robin Sharma, one of my favorite authors from Toronto, actually. And again, being a younger professional, I think for me and for anyone listening, this is a perfect opportunity to show that accountability. And it kind of answers what you're talking about, right? Being, I guess, quarantined or working from home. For a lot of people who aren't remote previous to Corona, this is a great opportunity to actually not only execute, but work your ass off and actually show that you can not only deliver on what is basically expected, but go above and beyond. Can you work on strategy? Can you figure out things that need improvement within your team, within those processes? I think that builds so much trust, man, with whether it's your CEO, your manager, your boss, or maybe you as a CEO have to work on some of those things internally. And I think it leads to a really good question that I think two that we got, which it was kind of on the sales side, but when you do get rejection, how do you keep yourself going? How do you maintain that energy? Just quickly on that, and obviously I want you to answer right after. But for me personally, I think that's why it's so important to work on yourself constantly, right? It's kind of like you're being selfish for in the same way that you're being selfless, because if so, let's say for example you're on the sales side as I am, or on the BD side, and every day you wake up, the first thing you do, just check your phone to like all these negative emails. Then you get up and, you just have so much shit to deal with. You had debt and it's just like a bad day, right? And you're kind of unhealthy. You're not eating well. You're not exercising. How is that day going to go? Right. And I'm not saying every day is going to be a 10 out of 10, but there are certain choices that you're making within a 24-hour period that you just notice the difference. And it's a very simple thing to look at. And it's just small tweaks. Right. So before a meeting, don't fucking eat a bucket of spaghetti. It's like,
don't go to KFC for lunch.
And I know that's an exaggeration, but I feel like if you wake up fresh perspective, the night before you're getting ready for your day, you know exactly which meetings, you're doing the research up front, you're trying to eat healthy, exercising, just even if it's a little bit, that energy is super important to keep you uplifted. And last thing I'll say for me, man, is on the macro, it's just the why. And I know people talk about it so much, but it really, really is important. Because if like, take me for example, right? I just moved to Chicago, basically working on my role by myself across the Midwest, and I'm trying to build the blueprint. And then all of a sudden, 2-3 months later, Corona happens, then we're in a recession, markets are down. How do you think I want to feel? But I think in every
you have every excuse to just throw up your hands right now and be like,
like this is It's
I
just not a
got
good
every excuse
time.
not to hit my targets or whatever right now, right?
Exactly. But the perspective then is, this is going to give me more time to learn even more about my craft, learn more about the market, get better acquainted about who I should connect with in the ecosystem.
Mhm.
So once this thing clears, I'm going to be full throttle like a freaking jaguar,
Love
and
it.
I think that that's an important one. So that's my take, at least, for that question.
Cool. No, thanks for asking questions. For those, I know we got some people on right now.
Yeah, if you got any more.
Yeah, if you got any more, hit them. I'll answer your question a little
Yeah,
differently. Um,
Cheeto, go ahead.
I don't really look at it. The question is asking, what's my rate of rejection? I don't really look at my rate of rejection, but I think the question is more centered around how do you bounce back from it, right?
Yeah.
I said it before, I said it again. I would never do a deal if I wasn't on the other side of the table and sign it myself, right? Like if I put myself in the other person's shoes. So I don't look at I look at rejection as a way of being like, hey, you're going to come around. Every time I pick up the phone to make a cold call, or every time I go into a meeting with someone, I am looking at it like I'm doing you a favor right now by being here. And that sounds arrogant, but my lens is I'm doing you a favor right now by being here, because I'm actually going to bring a bunch of value to you. And if I was you, I'd be working with me. I am somebody you need to be working with, right? And it's a mindset. It's a whole different mindset change. That I'm not going in to try to sell you. I'm going in to say, hey, you know what? I got a great solution to these problems that you're having, and I am the solution. Well, tribal skill is a solution more often than not. I'm not the solution, but tribal skill is a solution. And let's sit down together and solve this problem together. And so I'm doing you a favor by coming and talking to you. And when you have that attitude and you go in there, rejection is not really rejection. It's like, Sheetal, this makes sense.
Yeah.
You do need to come back to me in a couple months when I'm ready. I got some homework because I'm not ready for you yet. And that's fine. Right. So it's not really rejection. Sure.
Can you share that story, by the way? Because sorry, I didn't mean to barge in, but
No, go for
this
it.
is a perfect story when I think it was in New York. You had the rejection first. You come back to a massive boardroom. You had to present. Do you remember that?
Yeah. This is the one I told at Takeover.
Yeah.
I was in New York. We just started Tribal Scale. I was with my founders, and
You started in the bar, by the way.
We started in a private club with
Politically.
but the bar was our desk. So we would open our laptops. We would open our laptops, staring at booze. But yeah, but I did what I did. I started making cold calls and more warm calls. It was a company. It's a large media company in New York who I've worked with in the past, and they asked me to come in to present to them about what tribal skill is and what I'm doing. Like, you go there in this big boardroom and I start presenting, and they were just like, they take a look at me and they were just like, close the laptop, like stop the deck. I was so nervous too for that. I don't really get nervous that often going into meetings, but I was like, man, my whole company depends on like what happens.
It hinges on this meeting.
Well, I just quit. I just made some of the smartest people I know quit their very lucrative jobs to come sit at a bar with their laptops with me. You know what I mean? And yeah, they actually, the gentleman on the other side was just like, Sheetal, I've been working with you for quite some time, and even when you had the opportunity to upsell me, and you were being told to upsell me, you kind of gave me a nudge, and it was in your best interest to do it. It would have been my best interest to sell him more and make some crazy commission, but I gave him a nudge, being like, hey, I got to come present this to you. If you're ready for it, we should do the deal, but I don't think you're there yet. But let's do the presentation and see if I still think it's going to be a great solution for you, but it's just not, timing might not just be right. And he remembered me doing that for him, and he would have bought from me that day no matter what, right? Like the day I presented that to him with my previous company, he would have bought the solution, but he was like, he really appreciated that. And he looked at his other peers and he goes, this guy never effed me. And I would have bought anything from him. And so if he's coming to me right now saying that, hey, he has the right solution and he has the right team, we don't need to see any more of the deck. I trust him. We're going to work with him. And that was it. That was our first client, man. We started, and it was one of the world's largest media companies, and we started working with them. And that's how that's how the company started. So, you know who you're out there.
It's crazy.
He knows
crazy,
who he is,
man.
out there. Thank you for giving us our start. And yeah.
What I love too is like even the mindset. It's like I'm just picturing myself in your shoes. If one of the most important clients to start up this business that I'm working on, and I convinced 3 or 4 of my friends to join, the first thing they tell me is, listen, we're probably not going to go with this, but do the presentation nonetheless. Your energy just immediately, naturally, is just not going to be up there. And, you have to kind of control and keep that poker face and
Yeah.
just give it everything you have, as if though nothing was said before.
Right, right, right. I think
You
also
know?
think like when you go into like meetings like that, it's so important to listen. You want to like jump out and be like, I got your solution. I know what to do for you. Just shut the fuck up and listen. Listen to the other person, man. You could talk a lot, and it's not about how you talk or how you present or how finesse you are by presenting the slides. It's more about listening and making it contextual so that now you actually know the other person's problems and only talk to your solution. When your presentation, only go and show the aspects of your deck that are going to be important to that person and put it in their context, right? You get a lot further. We got a question online for you, brother. It's how'd you get started at the Toronto Stock Exchange? You
Yeah,
just,
so this is a good story
just
too.
go knock on their door? What'd you
Hey,
do?
what's up? You got a
Okay.
roll for me?
Can I ring the
Um,
bell?
well, you know what's funny, man? I never. So this was. I'll give you some context. I in my third year, I interned at General Electric, within their kind of financial management program. Right, first introduction to like a real company.
Yeah,
You know, probably one of the best business programs for students. I learned a shit
sure.
ton. Didn't end up getting
You
offered
actually
the full
learned from
time.
the real Jack Welch methodology, man.
Exactly. Yeah, this was right
God rest
before.
his soul now, right? But yeah,
Yeah, I know, tough
yeah.
one, but exactly that, and it was a great time to be there. So what ended up happening was they didn't offer me the full-time program. So I was in fourth year, didn't really know what I was going to do, and all my friends around me were applying like hundreds of online applications, and they were asking me the same question, like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, to be honest, I haven't applied to any. What I'm trying to do is figure out where I have relationships, because I spent a lot of time outside of uni networking, and I'm going to figure out if there are synergies there.
Yeah, you just
So
just smoke joints and chill with your friends on campus.
basically, is what I'm trying to say. And what ended up happening was, so I'm in the financial lab, and I joined a couple of my friends who started up the first investment fund at Telfer, which is the business school for University of Ottawa. One of the first sponsors to actually give us money was an executive at the TSX. So I spent a lot of time building that relationship with him, and he became an early mentor of mine, Jean de Gagné, great guy. And I happened to find an opening for the first associate program at TMX that they were just launching.
Nice.
So I sent him a note. I'm like, hey, listen, I came across this. I'm going to apply. All he wrote back was good luck. So I go through three interviews. And just the last thing I'll point out, when I went to the final one, which is in person, I drove with my parents from Ottawa to Toronto, which we drove at like 3 a.m. to get there early for the morning. And I remember my dad, man, every time, and obviously he's been a super big supporter of mine, but there were times when I'd wake up on Sundays to go to the, to the investment fund meetings and stuff at uni. And he'd be like, dude, you're wasting your time. Don't do these things. Just focus on uni, get good grades. And that was his perspective at the time. And when we were driving, I went for the final interview. It was the only one from Ottawa U. Everybody was from Ivy Leagues, UBC, McGill, the only guy from Ottawa, and
Yeah.
obviously you get the smirks. And so when we were driving back from the final interview, literally 30 minutes later, I get a call from Jean. He's like, and I put it on speaker. My dad was right next to me. My mom was in the back. And, he's just like, welcome to TMX. And, you're going to join our first associate program. And I was the first external hire. And, I think for a lot of people with immigrant parents, that was the first time when my dad was like, you know what, he kind of gave me the props for it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
He was
immigrant
a
dads will never
proud
tell you
dad.
anything.
He was a proud dad at that moment. He's like,
Yeah.
yeah, this not
And they won't tell you they're wrong,
the stupid guy actually made something happen, and you were right.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a great moment, man. But they've been amazing supporters of mine. But it's just an interesting story there. I don't know if you've ever dealt with that, being an entrepreneur with immigrant parents, but
God, my mom was just like, what are you doing? You're quitting job? Are you stupid?
the corporate side.
What do you mean you're going to quit job? You dumb? Stupid?
It's tough to convince.
Yeah, it's funny. My mom the other day, like we've been doing travel skills since end of 2015, October 2015 is when we first like started trying to figure out what we're doing. And my mom just the other day, she's like, what do I tell my friends at work what you do? I still don't understand myself. I'm like, wow, you still don't know what I do?
That's so jokes.
Cool.
Honestly, yeah.
Dude, what advice do you have for, look, there's a lot of people getting let go right now, which sucks. But I think you said a couple of cool things right now where you were like, hey, this isn't you took an opportunity to invest in yourself. What you're doing right now, since things are a little slower, in your current day job, you're investing in yourself for the future. I talked about what we're doing with clients to make that happen. What do you recommend to people who've just been let go, man, and all they see is doom and gloom in front of them? And so, what do you recommend they should be doing to come out of this?
Yeah, it's a great question. Listen, number one, it's not easy. I can only, imagine how you're feeling right now. And to be honest, I've experienced it too. The G example was a perfect one, and there were other points in my career where it didn't work out, right? Mutually, like it just didn't work out. And what I would say is this is a great time to, I guess, invest in yourself first and foremost. This is the perfect time to start putting yourself out there, leverage social channels, which I always talk about. So as I said in the beginning, this is going to be very difficult on you kind of morally. So the first thing I would say is just make sure mentally you're in a good place. And these are just some things I do. Doesn't mean that they're going to work for you, but for me, that's exercise constantly, right? And just kind of daily exercise. And I think from a sanity perspective, if you can go for a run or do some, I know now we're quarantined, do some yoga at home.
Peloton back there that I haven't used yet.
You got the Peloton, so hopefully you jump on that. But just any cardio workout, man, because when you get a good sweat, you get your mind off of the rut. If you're going to sit on the couch, bust out Cheetos and Ben and Jerry's, it's not going to take you to a better place. This is not the time to basically give up on this path. This is the time to really go hard at it while being mindful of your situation. And it's cool. Surround yourself with good people, right? Good friends. Even if it's quarantine, get on a Zoom call. For me, obviously, family is super important. My parents, whether it's your partner, it's close friends, someone like Cheeto who can, slap you in the face and with like positive words, essentially, and get you going again. I think so. From a motivational perspective, that's what I would start with. The second thing, and you pointed this out, which is super important, is someone said he's hiding Cheeto is hiding his Doritos right now, 100%.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say,
lady salt and vinegar guy, but sure.
I would say this whole kind of spray and pray approach to jobs right now is the worst thing you can do. I mean, it's the worst thing you can do anyways, regardless of the situation now. I would spend more time researching real companies that you really want to work for. So it's as basic as this. Come up with a list of 10 companies you really want to work for. I don't care if it's
descriptive,
Tribal Scale, Google, Facebook, just draft them, okay? Second thing I do, start getting more active on LinkedIn. If you don't have a big top profile, make sure that's fixed first. And then what I'd start doing is figure out who within those companies you really want to connect with. The other thing I would want to do is figure out from those companies, how could I be of value, right? So if I'm applying to a sales role, a BD role, I'd first read the description online. I wouldn't apply there, but I would read it online and then connect with that person. Say, listen, I just want 15 minutes of your time. I kind of wrote a one-pager or white paper, whatever it is, on this role. And this is how I think Google can market better to millennials. Or if I'm applying to a big bank, this is how I think you can approach Gen Zers with financial planning. There's robo-advisors like Wealthsimple. This is what I would do if I were you. And I just want 15 minutes of your time. I'd love if we can get on a call. So basically, I'm giving you the micro, but what that means on a high level is do your research upfront. Be very thoughtful and mindful as to who you're approaching and targeting. Stay optimistic and be patient. This is not the time to be super desperate, throwing out your resumes from the balcony. This is the time where you get sniper focused, laser focused. And also don't forget your worth. That's the last thing I would say. When I wasn't offered that full-time at GE, I kind of felt hit, man. I'm like, shit, well, if Fortune 500 is telling me no, who's going to tell me yes? And it's easy to get in that slump. So I think that's why, working on things outside of that and keeping yourself active, busy, creative, like my podcast helps with that, just keeps you on a bit of the correct path. And just because one role lets you go or whatever the case is, doesn't mean that your self-worth is tied to that.
We got Nahal Mehta on Instagram.
Nahal, what's going on, bro?
Oh, what's up, brother? I think I saw Sunny up in here too.
Congrats on your wife, by the way. I think I saw she joined the board recently.
With Hillary, with Hillary. Congrats to Reshma, man. Shout out.
What would you say, G, to that?
George, I love what you said. I'll say it from the other side. I mean, I get bombarded with people wanting to work with us all the time, right? And the worst email you could ever send me is, hey, Shido, I'm a young person and I'm really energetic. Can we go for coffee? I'm like, yeah, I'm sure I would love to do that. But if I answered everybody who did that, I wouldn't have any time to do any real work. the people who make it onto my calendar, I give mad props to. They come in, they send me something compelling. They, you know, whether it even be a quick deck or they write an email that's super concise and really not long, but like hammer home bullet points on like why it would be super important for us to have a conversation with this person. Or people who like come in like and say, hey, you know what, here's what I've done in the past. Here's how I could really leverage tribal skill. Sheetal, I've applied. Could you put me in touch with the person who's responsible for this job, right? Like, here's the energy and the thought process and exactly what you were saying I would bring to this job, and that's you know, really beneficial. And you take that and you go, hey, this person like is fighting to get in here, you know. You want to make that hire. Like, you wouldn't want to say no to that hire, and that's the beauty of it. So you just set yourself apart from everybody else who's just throwing a resume over the fence, right? I think the second thing, my other piece of advice is, if you are researching a company and you're looking really forward to it, you really feel like you want to be working at that company, find opportunities to intern, you know, go to those companies' events that they hold, go and network with the people there, find out ways that you could actually go and drive some value to them and show them, and, you know, the proof is in the pudding, show them what you're made of. And so there's a lot of different ways you could go do that. But, you know, it's scary times out there, and it might not happen overnight. You might not get the job overnight, but as soon as that organization is ready, you know, you want to be the top person on their list for them to bring you
in. Great points too, man. And we did get one question as well on the other side is, how do you keep your kind of, I would say, tribe? Let's put it that way. How are you keeping the tribe right now motivated?
Y'all, who got the vibe?
How are you keeping them motivated, man?
How do I keep them motivated? Shit, you got to be self-motivated. And I mean, I hope. Come on. If you're not motivated at the job you're at.
Never asked that question, Mike. No,
but it's true. If you're at a job where you're not motivated to go in, go fucking quit. What are you doing there? Why are you sitting there wasting that company's time and your time? What the hell's wrong with you? That's one thing. Amen. That's the only thing in the world.
Preach.
That's the only thing in the world you can't get back is time. So, go. You know, if you're not motivated, but however, I think there's a step you got to take and motivation you got to take to motivate your tribe. And for me, it's just the passion. You know, let's go and talk about a complex problem that all of us, if we do these 10 things each, all very different from each other, come together with a solution, right? And that gets motivating. You get people marching from the same drum. And that's how I like to motivate. I like to say, hey, look, we're in this together. I know myself. There's only very few times I could go beast mode and solve a lot of problems on myself. But it takes a team to go do it. So how are you going to go and like talk to your team and get them on this, you know, get them passionate about the task at hand? And it's usually the task and knowing what their role is and how the important role they play in solving that task is what starts getting people motivated. So,
yeah. And also I think like you're not always going to be motivated every single second of the day. And there's also going to be things that you're going to do that you just don't enjoy, even as a founder, man. Like, you know, in the early days, you have to do the admin, the HR, the hiring, the firing. Like, you have to be all of it, essentially. It's not always enjoyable or every aspect of it, but you still have to do it. So that feeling.
Dude, I hate finance meetings, man. Like, it drives me nuts. But it was probably the biggest mistake I had is that I still went away from it, you know. I had to find out now actually I enjoy them. I mean, to be honest, now actually I enjoy them, but it was just because it was my lack of understanding that made me hate those types of meetings. And so you got to figure out ways, even in tasks you hate, of what aspects of it are you going to like so that it becomes better for you so you actually enjoy doing it. All right. Here's George. This one's a good one for you. How can companies continue building their brand even when they're operating remotely?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Listen, I think, you know, you definitely don't want to be tone deaf. I think that's number one. Number two, it kind of depends on where you, like which industry you're in, because there's a lot of opportunities right now to positively help what's going on without doing it in a weird kind of scammy way. Because you're also seeing that, and I've seen a lot of companies who are just using the whole COVID situation just to market themselves.
Oh, dude,
I wouldn't take that.
Brutal. Hey, come on our webinar. Let's talk about COVID. I'm like, shut up. Yeah.
I think we're all just we're done with that, man. And people just get really tired very, very quickly. And thankfully for the internet, you can smell that BS miles away. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend that approach. I think right now, if you're a company, you're seeing it from many. Lightspeed is an example. A good friend of mine, Swish, with TrueFan, is another example of
Mhm.
demonstrating this. Is how can you take your product, your service, whatever you're doing now, package it in a way that could be of value without the economics that you once had pre-COVID. And it's okay. You need to ride the wave. You're going to take a slash somewhere. And
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
said this before, like someone is going to take a hit in different levels. And so this is not the time to be, looking at margins and kind of price skimming and doing all that stuff. I think now building your brand reputation is number one. Two, if you're not on digital, this is a great opportunity to, highlight the day in the life of a CEO, what you guys are doing. And I love actually your the pivot with your podcast is cool because you get engineers who interview other coders. You
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
people on the product management side to talk about that. So and there's so much content you can talk about that is relevant to different pockets of people. This is the time to be leveraging social channels to the best of your abilities and just position your company as being of value without looking like an a-hole.
Cool. George, we got 5 minutes. I love you. I love talking to you, dude. I think I could talk to you
Likewise,
for
man.
hours, man. Let's get a couple of the last questions in here. I just saw one. What do you think about Forex trading versus stock trading?
You want to take this first?
I'm not the dude. One thing I know is I don't know shit when it comes to the markets. I have
Danny,
no
miss you
idea,
too, bro.
I have no idea why the markets are up right now or even climbing back right now. I mean, the Fed just printing a bunch of money and throwing it at the problem, I don't think is a reason that market should be up, especially for 2 months when everybody's staying at home and spending power has died. But what do I know? Obviously, I'm a fool. But I'll let you
No,
answer.
you're good, dude.
I'm no Warren Buffett, dude.
Likewise, man. Likewise. I'm going to say something. I mean, this is just what I do. And I think like Nassim Taleb talks about, the best forecasters are taxi drivers. So I think we're all in the same bucket, right?
Yeah.
I would just say in terms of stock, my personal philosophy, this is not the approach of TMX or whatever, but my personal philosophy was a chunk of my portfolio. I actually love Simple. So shout out to them. It's more kind of passive. They do a lot of the rebalancing.
Love it. I love the fact that they got young people actually giving a shit about their savings and their
exactly.
future. I love it. I love anything Mike Catch, and shout out to you and the Wealth Simple team. They're just killing it. I love it.
Exactly. And I think what this thing has taught us, especially for people who are 20s, 30s listening, build an emergency fund first, pay off your debt, and then whether it's ETFs like exchange traded funds, which is what I prefer investing in.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are more kind of risk averse, I would say. If you want to look at individual companies, there are a lot of great resources to either read, or like one of my favorite books is The Intelligent Investor. If you want, or Walk Down Wall Street. Investopedia is obviously always good for just common questions. It's like the Google for finance.
But right now, I would say that was Investopedia, Walk Down Wall Street, and what was the third one?
The Intelligent Investor for
Intelligent
books.
Investors. So there you go. You got some time on your hands, COVID people.
Exactly.
Go read, yeah.
Danny, hope you're doing well, bro. He's sending some love from Dubai. So
I love it. What's up, Danny? This has been really cool, man. I like this remote podcast is actually working out. I'm liking it.
Me too, man. Well, thanks for having me on, dude. And just to cap this off.
Yeah.
One last thing for you. What would you say would be an advice for someone, in their 20s, 30s, looking to start either a company or a venture, whatever the case is?
There's no time better than in recessions. The amount of innovation that happens in downturns, it's when you have to innovate. Standard business models could go out the window now. This is a time for you to break the status quo and innovate. So if you feel you have the right idea, you've done the right research, you're ready to take your calculated risk, there's no time like now. You got guys like Nahal and others out there who are still, if your idea is sound and your team is sound and you're going to go solve a big problem, go out there. I'm sure you could still go raise. You could still go get money. That's not going to stop if your idea is sound, or at least it'll get you on the right track. But I think in recession, some of the best companies come out of them. So I'm going to be watching and hopefully taking part in the next wave of companies that come out there. I think there's a lot of innovation that's going to come out of this, and that'll be one of the positive things we take away from this pandemic.
Love it, dude.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for the conversation, man. This has been amazing.
Dude, this has been amazing. George, give a plug to your podcast too. I want everybody to know your podcast as well.
Yeah, sure thing. So it's Let's Grab Coffee, again, on all audio platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the whole 9 yards, and just happy to connect, answer any more questions you guys have.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. Thanks for doing this. Really
Thank you, man.
appreciate it, man. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.